The sea outside the cliff house glimmered like liquid silver beneath the November sun, its waves colliding rhythmically against the rocks below. Inside, Steffi Forrester Finnegan moved with her usual precision, an elegant balance of grace and control that belied the quiet storm within her. Thanksgiving had always been a complicated holiday for her. It carried the warmth of family, but also the unspoken ache of what had been lost, the ghosts of choices, betrayals, and fragile truces. This year, though, she had promised herself it would be different. She wanted the laughter of her children to fill every corner of the house, the scent of roasted turkey to erase the scent of loneliness, and the presence of family to remind her that life still had beauty left in it. Kelly was darting around the living room, a whirlwind of curls and energy, her small hands clutching a paper turkey she'd made in school. Hayes sat on the floor, babbling as Finn tried to assemble a miniature wooden train set for him. Watching them, Steffi felt a flicker of peace. For all the chaos that had shaped her world, these moments made it worth enduring. Finn, steady and quietly protective, caught her gaze and smiled, the kind of smile that reminded her she had rebuilt her life from ashes more than once. Taylor Hayes arrived with her familiar air of gentleness, carrying 2 pies and that tender concern that only a mother could bring. There was still a trace of sorrow in Taylor's eyes, a glimmer of wounds not yet healed, but she wore her strength like an old, faithful coat. Steffi embraced her mother tightly, trying not to feel the weight of the years that had separated them, or the love triangle that had once consumed them all. Taylor's smile was real this time, softer than in months past. "We made it," she said quietly, not just about the holiday, but about surviving. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. The table was dressed in muted golds and creams, the candles flickering gently. The air was full of laughter and the aroma of cinnamon and sage. It was simple, peaceful, until a knock on the door disrupted it. Steffi's heart paused. There was only one person who would arrive unannounced and still be welcomed without question. When Ridge Forrester stepped into the doorway, time seemed to hold its breath. His familiar presence filled the room with both nostalgia and tension. He had always been the axis around which their family revolved, the man who could unite and divide with equal power. Taylor's face softened instantly, surprise mingling with something deeper, something she didn't dare name. Ridge smiled, carrying a bottle of wine and that effortless charm that could still unravel her defenses. "Thought I'd see if there's room for one more," he said, his voice warm, his eyes uncertain. For Steffi, his arrival was a blessing. Her family, fractured by choices and loyalties, was finally under one roof again. She guided him to the table, watching as Taylor tried to hide her trembling hands. The years of heartbreak between them had not erased affection. It had merely buried it under layers of restraint and self-protection. As they all sat together, Ridge, Taylor, Steffi, Finn, Kelly, and Little Hayes, the atmosphere grew richer, more intimate. The meal became a quiet symphony of gratitude and memory. Kelly proudly listed the things she was thankful for: Mommy, Daddy, Grandma, Grandpa, and my little brother. Taylor blinked back tears. Even Ridge looked humbled, the usual sharpness in his eyes replaced by something human and unguarded. Steffi spoke next, her voice steady. She was thankful for peace, not the kind that came from perfection, but the fragile kind that had to be rebuilt each day. Finn squeezed her hand beneath the table, understanding every word she didn't say. He, too, was thankful for redemption, for love that had survived mistrust, for the chance to still believe in family. Taylor hesitated when her turn came. Gratitude was difficult for a woman who had spent much of her life watching the man she loved belong to someone else. But as she looked at Ridge, she found herself speaking from a place of honesty rather than pride. She was thankful for growth, for forgiveness, and for the courage to love without expectation. Ridge's expression softened. He reached out and touched her hand briefly. It was not a promise, but a silent acknowledgement that despite everything, there was still a thread connecting them. After dinner, as the children ran off to play, Taylor and Ridge found themselves alone by the fireplace. The light danced across their faces, reflecting years of shared history. They didn't need words. The quiet between them said enough. Ridge had broken her heart before, yet she could never resent the part of him that had always belonged to her. For once, it wasn't about rekindling romance. It was about recognizing that even broken love could leave behind something pure, understanding. Meanwhile, across town, another kind of Thanksgiving was unfolding at Il Giardino. The restaurant was dimly lit, the tables adorned with flickering candles that reflected off polished wine glasses. Deacon Sharp had gone all out, not for the sake of presentation, but to convince himself that this night meant something. He had invited Sheila Carter, the woman who had turned his life upside down, and against all odds, she had accepted. Sheila arrived fashionably late, wearing a dark red dress that seemed to echo the danger she carried wherever she went. There was something almost human in her smile tonight, a fleeting glimpse of someone who wanted to belong. Deacon greeted her with warmth, but his eyes betrayed the confusion in his heart. He cared for her, maybe even loved her, but he also knew the cost of that love. It was a dangerous addiction, one that had nearly destroyed him before. To make the evening feel less intimate, Deacon had extended invitations to Carter Walton and Daphne Rose, an unlikely pair of guests who represented the world of order and morality that Sheila could never quite reach. Carter arrived first, polite but visibly uncomfortable. Daphne followed, curious and wary. The contrast between them and Sheila was sharp, yet somehow, as the evening unfolded, a fragile camaraderie began to form. Over dinner, the conversation was cautious at first. Carter talked about gratitude and second chances, Daphne about compassion. Deacon listened, torn between wanting to be part of their world and knowing that he never fully could. Sheila, surprisingly, contributed her own version of humility. She spoke of mistakes, of redemption, and of the rare people who believed in her despite everything. For a moment, even Carter couldn't deny the sincerity in her voice. Sheila's eyes glistened when she mentioned Taylor Hayes. "If not for her," she said softly, "I might have lost everything." Taylor had once shown her mercy, an act that still haunted both of them. Deacon watched Sheila carefully. He could tell she meant it, but he also knew that gratitude could quickly morph into obsession with her. That was the problem with Sheila. Every emotion she felt was too intense, too absolute. As the evening deepened, Deacon found himself lost in reflection. His restaurant was full, the laughter of patrons blending with the clinking of glasses. It should have been a sign that he had made it, that he had rebuilt his life. But when his eyes met Sheila's across the table, he felt that dangerous pull again. Part of him wanted to believe she had changed. The other part knew better. Sheila leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You're all I have, Deacon," she whispered. He didn't respond, because even if he wanted to believe that, he knew it wasn't true. She was addicted to chaos, to power, to the thrill of walking the edge. He had seen it in her too many times to pretend otherwise. And yet, as the night went on, he found himself drawn back in, like a moth circling a flame that would eventually consume it. Carter and Daphne left first, offering polite goodbyes. When the door closed, silence filled the room again. Deacon poured 2 glasses of wine, his hands steady, but his heart unsteady. Sheila smiled faintly, her eyes tracing his face, as if memorizing it. For all her manipulation, there was an undeniable vulnerability in her gaze. "You saved me," she said. "Even if you don't believe it." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she had to save herself. But the words never came. Instead, he found himself looking out at the empty tables, wondering if redemption was ever truly possible for people like them. Later that night, as Steffi tucked Kelly into bed and watched the waves crash against the shore, she thought about her father and mother sitting together again, about love that refused to die even when it should have. She thought about Deacon and Sheila, 2 souls entangled in their own storm. Life, she realized, was full of strange parallels. Everyone was trying to find something to be thankful for, even if what they found was fragile, temporary, or incomplete. Taylor lingered by the window after everyone had gone to bed, her reflection merging with the sea beyond. She didn't know what the future held for her and Ridge. Maybe it was friendship. Maybe it was simply closure. But for the first time in a long while, she felt peace, the kind that comes not from getting what you want, but from finally accepting what is. Across town, Sheila sat alone at Il Giardino after Deacon had gone upstairs to close out the books. The lights were dim, and the sound of the waves could still be heard faintly through the open patio doors. She smiled to herself, not a sinister smile this time, but one tinged with melancholy. For one night, she had been part of something normal. She had been seen, accepted, even if only for a few hours. But in the shadows of her mind, she felt the pull of darker thoughts. Redemption was fleeting. The past never stayed buried for long. As the credits of the day faded into the night, both homes, the Cliff House and the restaurant, stood as mirrors of the same truth. Thanksgiving had given everyone a taste of unity, of forgiveness, of fragile hope. But beneath the laughter and gratitude, the old wounds still whispered. Ridge's glance at Taylor had awakened emotions neither could fully suppress. Deacon's heart was once again caught between desire and danger. Sheila's temporary calm masked the storm she could never outrun. And yet, there was beauty in that imperfection. Because in their own flawed ways, each of them had found something to hold on to: love, family, or the possibility of change. The world of the bold and the beautiful was rarely kind, but on this Thanksgiving night, it had granted its characters a brief, shimmering illusion of peace, a peace that, like the ocean outside the Cliff House, was both eternal and endlessly changing. The world of the bold and the beautiful has always thrived on contradictions, love intertwined with betrayal, beauty masking cruelty, and grief blending seamlessly with desire. But few storylines have shaken the emotional foundation of Los Angeles as deeply as the tragedy surrounding Will Spencer Jr., Luna Nozawa, and Elector Forrester. What began as a scandalous entanglement spiraled into something darker, more tragic, and infinitely more revealing about human nature itself. The news of Luna's miscarriage and her sudden death on the highway wasn't just another soap opera twist. It was a moral earthquake that left everyone involved fractured in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. When the episode opened, the atmosphere around Spencer Publications was strangely muted. The city's usual pulse, the chatter of models, the endless echo of ambition, seemed distant, irrelevant. Will sat alone in his father's office, staring out the window as the light of late afternoon draped the skyline in amber. Dollar Bill Spencer's empire had always been built on control, dominance, and strategy, but his youngest son had inherited something different, an unsettling vulnerability that now felt like a curse. Luna's name echoed in his mind like a ghost he couldn't exorcise. The last time he saw her, she was trembling, terrified, but determined to tell him the truth. The words had carved through him with surgical precision. She had lost their baby. The revelation should have brought relief. After all, the child was the product of a relationship forged in chaos, deceit, and danger. Luna had been branded by the world as unstable, unpredictable, even dangerous. Yet, when she confessed her miscarriage, Will didn't feel freed. He felt hollow. The idea of becoming a father had terrified him, but it had also awakened something fragile within him, a chance to prove that he wasn't like his father, that he could nurture rather than destroy. Now, that possibility had been taken from him, and the cruel irony was that the woman who carried his child was dead only hours later, struck down on a highway as if fate itself had declared her story finished. Will's grief was raw, complex, and quietly self-destructive. He couldn't separate sorrow for Luna from guilt for his role in her downfall. His father's power couldn't protect him from this kind of pain. It was too personal, too intimate. He kept replaying the events that led up to her imprisonment. Luna, impulsive but not malicious, had fallen into a spiral after being framed for a crime she didn't commit. Her arrest had been public humiliation, her time in prison an ordeal that no pregnant woman should have endured. And yet, someone had ensured she ended up there, someone close to him, someone he trusted. That someone was Electra Forrester. Electra had been his salvation once, confident, ambitious, unshakably poised. She had drawn him out of his reckless habits, made him feel desirable and grounded all at once. But beneath the soft curls and impeccable fashion sense, there was an edge to her, a hunger for power, for validation, for victory. When Luna became a threat, not only romantically but symbolically, Electra reacted in the only way she knew how. She eliminated her. Not with violence, but with manipulation. A whispered phone call to the police, a carefully timed revelation of Luna's whereabouts, and the wheels of destruction began to turn. In Electra's mind, she was merely reclaiming her rightful place. But when news broke that Luna had miscarried while in custody, that illusion shattered. The act meant to secure her happiness had instead stained it with something she couldn't wash away. She tried to tell herself that Luna was unstable, that this was bound to happen. But deep down she knew she had set the chain of events in motion. When she arrived at Will's side after Luna's death, Electra expected relief in his eyes. Instead, she found grief so deep it frightened her. He barely looked at her as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's over," she whispered, meaning to comfort him. But he only turned away. Over the following days, the emotional distance between them widened like a fault line. Will avoided her gaze, his voice clipped, his movements mechanical. Every word she spoke seemed to echo in the hollow space between them. Electra tried to reclaim control, arranging dinners, pretending to share in his sorrow, acting the part of the supportive girlfriend, but inside, resentment began to simmer. How could he mourn someone who had nearly destroyed them? Why couldn't he see that Luna's death was liberation, a clean slate for them both? The truth, however, was far more dangerous than jealousy. Will's grief was evolving into obsession. He began to visit the stretch of highway where Luna died, standing silently as the cars rushed past. He left flowers once, then twice, then every day. The paparazzi caught him once, his expression unreadable. The headlines were merciless. Dollar Bill's son haunted by lost love. But to Will, it wasn't about love, it was about justice. He couldn't accept that Luna's death was random. The timing, the brutality, the silence surrounding it, everything felt orchestrated. And so he began to ask questions. He talked to officers, reporters, even Luna's few remaining friends. Slowly, a pattern emerged, whispers of an anonymous tip, a mysterious caller, and the growing suspicion that someone close to the Spencer family had engineered Luna's arrest. When Will confronted Electra about it, her calm exterior faltered for the first time. She denied it, of course, her voice trembling between fear and anger, but something in her eyes betrayed her. It was the same look Luna had once described, the Forrester mask cracking under pressure. From that moment on, their relationship transformed into a psychological war. Will withdrew further, avoiding her touch, refusing her attempts at intimacy. Electra, panicking, alternated between seduction and rage, desperate to reclaim the narrative. She began to paint Luna as manipulative even in death, suggesting that she had used Will's guilt to control him. But every time she spoke her rival's name with contempt, Will's silence grew colder, sharper. The tension finally reached its breaking point one night when Will found Luna's old locket among the police evidence he'd managed to obtain. Inside was a tiny sonogram photo, blurry, fragile, but unmistakable. His child. For the first time, the abstract grief became real. He clutched the locket to his chest and felt something inside him snap, the grief giving way to fury, not at Luna, but at the system, the lies, and the woman who had smiled while destroying them both. Electra sensed the change. The next morning, she awoke to find Will gone. When she finally tracked him down, he was at the beach, the same one they had once walked together as lovers. But now his eyes were distant, unrecognizable. "You killed her," he said quietly, not shouting, not accusing, just stating it as fact. She denied it again, but the words no longer mattered. He wasn't looking for a confession. He was mourning what he had lost, not just Luna, but the man he had been before he met Electra. What followed in the weeks after Luna's death was a descent into emotional chaos. Electra's guilt began to manifest as paranoia. Every text Will ignored, every glance he withheld, every whisper she heard at Forrester Creations convinced her that people knew that her secret wasn't safe. She grew erratic at work, snapping at models, missing deadlines, and spiraling into insecurity. Even her once immaculate public image began to crack. Ridge and Steffi noticed her instability, while Hope privately wondered whether Electra's ambition had finally consumed her. Meanwhile, Will's grief transformed into purpose. He began to attend legal hearings related to Luna's case, speaking to journalists and even hinting at funding a private investigation into her death. Dollar Bill tried to intervene, urging his son to let the past rest, but Will refused. "You taught me to fight for what matters," he said, and for the first time, Bill realized that his son's strength came not from him, but from his own defiance. As the truth edged closer to the surface, Electra found herself trapped. Every lie she told required another, every denial another layer of deceit. She started drinking alone at night, her reflection in the mirror becoming a stranger. The image of Luna haunted her, not as a ghost seeking revenge, but as a reminder of the person she could never be. Flawed, impulsive, but real. Electra's perfection had become her prison, and Will's moral awakening was the key she couldn't control. The final blow came during a memorial service organized by Luna's aunt, Lee Finnegan. It was intimate, almost painfully quiet. A few candles, a framed photo, and the ocean's endless hum. Will spoke briefly, his words trembling but sincere. "She wasn't perfect," he said, "but she tried. And that's more than most people do." The audience applauded softly, but Electra's expression darkened. Those words weren't just a eulogy, they were a verdict. Later that evening, when Will returned home, he found Electra waiting. Her eyes were swollen, her voice trembling between rage and desperation. "You still love her," she accused. But he only shook his head. "I don't love her," he said quietly. "I mourn what we could have been, all of us." Then he walked away, leaving her standing in the silence she had created. In the months that followed, the Spencer and Forrester worlds would continue to intertwine, but the ripple effect of Luna's death lingered. Will became more distant from his family, channeling his grief into philanthropy, working quietly with prison reform groups. It was his way of atoning for what he couldn't undo. Electra, on the other hand, began to unravel publicly. Rumors of her role in Luna's arrest began to circulate, though no one could prove anything. Her career at Forrester suffered, her confidence eroded, and the once celebrated heiress found herself isolated, the victim of her own ambition. And yet, beneath all the tragedy, a haunting truth remained. No one in this story was purely innocent or purely guilty. Luna's impulsiveness had endangered her. Electra's jealousy had destroyed her. Will's weakness had allowed it all to happen. Each of them was both victim and perpetrator, bound together by choices that couldn't be undone. In the final scene of the arc, Will stood again on the same highway where Luna had died. The wind tore at his jacket, and the world around him seemed frozen in twilight. He closed his eyes, clutching the locket with the sonogram. Somewhere in that fragile image, that shadow of a life that never began, he found both torment and peace. He whispered her name, not as a plea, but as a farewell. Behind him, the city lights glimmered, beautiful, deceptive, eternal, just like the people who lived within it. And thus, the bold and the beautiful reminded its audience, once more, in a world built on glamour and desire, it's the hidden fractures, the quiet guilt, the impossible love, the grief no one dares to show, that make its characters truly human.